And we would like to go forward with Matthias Sebastian Krüger, how to instill microtones to conventional instruments. He studied composition with, the compositions of Matthias Sebastian Krüger focus on the exploration of novel tonalities and harmonic potential with spectra, overtones, harmonic and inharmonic sound, serving as essential bases, established and contextualized in a variety of ways, including the consistent use of microtonality. He studied composition with Jörg Höller, Frédéric Dubourg, Georg Friedrich Haas, and Erik Onya. Piano conductor at Cologne, Paris, Frankfurt, and Basel. In 2010 and 11, he was guest lecturer at the University of Arts at Graz. He received scholarship from the Studienstiftung des DT Volkes, the ABB, among others, and numerous awards like the Stipendium Prize of the Darmstadt Summer Courses in 2002. Composition prizes of the festival in Ensemblia, Mönchengladbach in 2003, Krefelder Tage Neue Musik 2013, and Karlsruher Kompositionswettbewerb 2014, and invitations to the 7th Nachwuchsforum of the Ensemble Modern and to the Kremlin of the Ensemble Contemporain, IRCAM in 2006-2007. Performances, for example, at the Abbaye Royamont, Konzerthaus Berlin, IRCAM Center Pompidou, Festival Agora in Paris, ZKM Karlsruhe, Darmstadt Summer Courses, Davos Festival, Ensemblia Mönchengladbach, Zwetzinger Festspiele, St. Plasma Tallinn, and Kulturm Graz. Recently, his work Trace Lumineuse, one for bassoon and electronics, has been published on a CD by Johannes Schwarz, Ensemble Modern. Okay, please welcome Matthias Sebastian.
Thank you very much for this introduction and for inviting me to this beautiful symposium. I don't want to bother too much with classifying prefaces because a little more than half an hour is a pretty short time to present even a small part of the impressive extract of constructional and preparatory new developments of the last years, what make common instruments more flexible for microtones. Actually, my personal interest as a composer play a role in my selection, of course. I am primarily interested in expanding common instruments with as little financial effort as possible and with the greatest possible flexibility in terms of intonation and scaling. I mainly focus on analog instruments now because basically any microtonal concept can be realized with electronics. But I will also introduce you to an electronic device as well. If one presents a selective overview of more or less newly developed microtonal instruments at a forum like the symposium, sometimes things that others have already told you before probably will be repeated inevitably. I hope that you won't be bored in this case nevertheless. Let's start on the top of the orchestral score with the woodwinds. Optimized for the tempered scale in terms of board, nose and fingering, a large number of microtones can also be realized here by means of alternative fingerings, although sometimes with losses in terms of intonation, stability, sound quality and speed of play. It can be pretty captivating to act on the preconditions and possibilities offered by the respective wind instrument with the occurring stable microtones and also multiphonics, which always contains microphones, as objet trouvé based on certain fingerings to design asymmetric, nonlinear, situational microtonality. I have chosen this way for a microtonale etude, which I'm currently writing for the recorder player Catherine Bennett, who some of you might know. She plays on 2 recorders at the same time. Some holes of each recorder are sealed, as she has obviously only one hand, 5 fingers for each recorder, and such the stock of pitches, and thus the paths for creating harmony in 2 voices arise from all still possible fingering combinations on both recorders. This explicitly inductive way of composing is challenging, but it makes fun. For the flute, the normal flute, for example, there's a construction with additional keys we already heard about yesterday, the Kingma Systems flute, which enables a complete quarter-tone scale developed by Eva Kingma and Bigford W. Brennan. It is played, for example, by Carla Rees of the London Rarspain Ensemble. For me personally, even more interesting is Robert Dick's glissando head joint, we already heard a little bit about, which can simply be plugged into a standard large flute instead of the normal head joint. It allows stepless downward movements of up to a minor third, and thus sets no limits to intonatory subtleties comparable to the slide trombone without having to use special fingerings. Watch a short snippet of a demo video featuring Robert Dick below. I will jump a little.
One controls it with these arms, and these are bendable. They're made out of surgical steel. They can be bent back and forth many times, and one size doesn't fit all, and so you can widen them. When you do bend them, hold them close to here, and then bend them like that, and you can bend them back in or out. Now, you could, of course, move your head, but it seems so much more natural to move the flute.
I think that's good for a first impression. If you want to know more about, for example, the fingering charts, with the space on every fingering to be slided down, you can just learn nearly everything about from this website. Actually, the sexiest option is to plug the glissando head joint on a Kingma system flute, as Erik Drescher, flutist from Berlin, does, who I had the pleasure to write a piece for the Sound Plasma Festival last November in Tallinn, as some of you all also know. Unfortunately, the recording didn't come out well, otherwise I would play a part of it now. But so we continue to the clarinet. Regarding the clarinet, which overblows into the 12th, as we know, a newly constructed instrument was developed for the Berlin Pierce scale, which, roughly speaking, divides the 12th into pure minor thirds and scales them further into somewhat larger 3/4 tone steps. That's just a side notice, because, as I said, I'm focusing on developments where maximum of intonatory flexibility can be created with relatively manageable structural changes or preparations, and which are not optimized for a specific scale. So, we come now to brass instruments. Here, of course, the trombone has an almost limitless flexibility for microtones. Since the natural tones are the basis of sound production. Sorry, I was too fast. The other instruments also offer a large number of potential microtones, albeit incomplete and dissymmetric, namely with the 7th, 11th, and 13th partial, which differs significantly from the temperate semitones. As the valves of brass instruments only theoretically allow a clean semitone scale, in reality, the more valves are pressed simultaneously and the tube length add up, the semitone distances become smaller. There are also so-called intonation slides, above all on many trumpet models, which microtones can also be adjusted perfectly with. By retuning the valve slides, further exciting microtonal moods can be created. As an example, now we are there, an undertone valve tuning for trumpet and tuba by Marc Sabat. Here, by retuning the valve slides and adding the pipe length, when several valves are pressed, a perfect undertone series mirroring the partial tone series can be produced. I checked it, it's really correct. With the trumpet from the 15th to the 20th undertone, with the tuba even from the 15th to the 27th undertone. As you see here. Exciting harmonic networks can be woven with the series of partial above the basic tones generated in this way. By the way, here it's written with one of the first version of Peggy, what we heard sometimes about in these days. Additional valves have expanded the range of microtones that can be reached in brass instruments distinctly even in the lower register. Samuel Stoll developed an 8-tone horn, for example. The Cologne trumpeter Victor Filippo has added a 4th valve to his flugelhorn, which not only significantly extends the instrument's pitch range downwards, but also generates a multitude of microtones in combining with the other valves. Here, his flugelhorn fingering chart with the resulting pitches, or at least a small part of it. You see always what valves are pressed and which microtones rusted to 8th tones then come out. By the way, Victor Filippo is looking for newly composed etudes for this advanced instrument for his flugelhorn course, so if you are interested. Or Stephen Altoft, whom many of you here surely know, constructed with an additional valve a 19th tone trumpet or 19th tone flugelhorn, where the octave is divided into 90 tones, which can be transformed into a quarter-tone trumpet and a quarter-tone flugelhorn in just a few steps. Together with all natural tones, this results in an immense tonal stock of microtones beyond the basic scale. 19 Edo and 24 Edo. And me, I'm personally dreaming of a slight half horn. I come to percussion instruments. In general, in terms of microtones, instruments with fixed tempered pitches are a particular challenge. For example, pitched percussion instruments. Here, drums and timpani still offer the greatest scope, where you can do fine-tunings of certain drums, for example, rototoms, or in case of the pedal timpani, you can control intermediate positions of the pedal with the foot. As we learned Harry Partch has created an impressive arsenal of percussion instruments, specially tailored to his harmonies, which were replicated for the Musikfabrik in Cologne, so I don't have to talk about that more. And there are still the possibilities to tune percussion instruments with water and modeling clay. For example, water gongs, tubular bells, or modeling clay you can put into the nibble of gongs. That's sometimes also done for retune gongs who are out of standard tuning. And very exciting it is also when you prepare vibraphone sticks with modeling clay. Just have a look. The limitation is that these preparations change and impair the sound compared to the unprepared instruments quite much. No, next. String instruments with frets was also a theme in those last days. For example, Baroque instruments. These are an exciting model because the semitone frets can be divided, for example, on the gamba in order to, simply explain, make the difference between flats and sharps perceivable. In my composition, Giacona Fluida for Ensemble with Baroque Instruments from 2003, this led me to arrange the frets for the marimba and gamba and lute in third tones, which together with a special scodatura produced the nice microtonal stock of tunes, which of course also had gaps. And I'm asking myself why I didn't have the idea then to transfer that to a guitar. Actually, I didn't know anything about the guitars already produced in the 20th century, so it lasted 10 more years until I heard about the microtonal guitar by Tolga Hançoglu with the movable frets. This allows the craziest, even asymmetrical tunings to be created, but that takes time to do. Practical variants of this are guitars with removable, respectively interchangeable fretboards, as we experienced. For example, by Michael Kudelka. And what I hope I will come back into contact to them, a guitar with removable and interchangeable, respectively interchangeable fretboards with movable frets on it, like from Tolga Hançoglu, which Fabrice Lengron and Gonzalo Perez presented at the festival Mikrotöne Basel. So I really hope this could be, or could become, the gold standard for microtonal guitars. Interchangeable fretboards with movable frets. Let's listen to the beginning of my composition Arkadische Botschaften Bonn for microtonal guitar in scodatura with prepared steel string guitar in scodatura for Stefan Schmidt. I will now jump to a point where also this prepared steel string guitar comes in. It's a construction a friend made for me with what a bottleneck can be pulled over the strings with a foot movement. I'm sorry for my composition to interrupt, but I just chose short excerpts as I really have quite a lot of material. The next thing I would talk about are keyboard instruments. For the standard piano, an obvious option is including harmonics produced by touching the strings inside the piano. Admittedly, a harmonic on the piano is different to a harmonic, for example, on a bowed string instrument. If you play a harmonic on a string instrument, you get, with a bit of luck, a very pure and stable pitch. On the piano, it's different. With a harmonic on the piano, its provenance always gleams, in other words. It carries around its fundamental and its spectrum always with itself like a backpack. And if you're touching the string just a trivial beside the harmonic, you get something more like a multiphonic, which are more partials of the fundamental are shimmering in. Controlling that is a fascinating possibility to extend the piano to its microtonality, above all if one is focusing and composing with overtones, contextualizations like me. Differently to multiphonics on wind instruments, piano multiphonics are very pure, very stable, and reproducible on every string chord in the low register without any exception. By the way, the same thing works on every string instrument, also bowed string instrument, in the low register. The limitation is that these multiphonics harmonics are, like every harmonics on the piano, based on temperate fundamentals, and thus are usable only in overtone fields based on temperate fundamentals. Caspar Johannes Walter and Erik Onya made a very systematic and comprehensive cartography of the piano string with all possible harmonics and harmonic multiphonics, which I demonstrate you here now. Here you have, it's not very good to read the harmonics, and here an extract of the possible multiphonics in between with the partial numbers. You see here, for example, 1, 5, 6, 11, which are part of these multiphonics. In my piece, Weben quasi una cadenza to the recitative in the piano sonata opus 110 by Ludwig van Beethoven, I'm using these techniques quite extensively. I'll show you a short extract of the piece with the pianist Dmitry Bakalov. that was it. And one day I heard by chance on Facebook something about the Macchiano device by the Finnish jazz pianist Kari Ikonen. Kari Ikonen invented this device for being able to play also Arabisch Makama on the piano. Such the denomination Macchiano is composed from the words Makam and piano. It's this guy. I have it also here live, but I have to keep it away from all electronic device as it has really strong magnets. With those strong magnets, the string chord is pinched off like with a capotesto, and thus the pitch is raised microtonally. It brings with itself only a small disturbance of sound quality and volume and a high precision in terms of tuning. But it's limited to the middle O, from where the strings start to be bichord, and to the middle register of the piano, and it's hardly possible to tune two adjacent strings. Except if one can be prepared at the front side and the other on the back side. And well, it's pretty expensive. What is not possible with most of what I've presented so far is to establish a closed, complete tuning system, an alternative tonal system. For this, you rather need specially constructed instruments or software, what I like to demonstrate one now. I'm sure you already heard about microtonal piano, as Juan Carrillo constructed them. Very common is the 16th tone piano, which you can find in some places. And well, he also constructed pianos in other EDOs. And for example, in Bern, for example, there's a 12th tone piano apparently. And well, there are in fact, as we already heard about, quite some quarter tone pianos. Actually, you can play them like, well, with two registers. There's just one piece for a digital adaptation. I know from history for a long time, a Rad for two keyboards by Enno Poppe. And as I said, I make it a little shorter now, the pianos by Juan Carrillo, the quarter tone pianos. And, well, I thought by myself, what a great chamber and ensemble music instrument actually, even if I prefer the 12th tone piano, which suits more to my music, it would be. With all of these precisely tuned microtones, a perfect intonation backbone for other instruments and singers. And such I decided to use it like that in a piece, together with alto flute, standard piano and double bass, which isn't performed so far, unfortunately. It's Harte Schale, Weiche Kern 1. As I was aware that I limit the potential location for performing it substantially with using a real piano, a real 16th piano, I thought from the very beginning about a version with keyboard coded to a 16th tone keyboard. So in the beginning, this was just a pragmatic consideration. Sandro Balzarini, a former fellow student from Erik Onya's class for electroacoustic composition in Basel, found a solution for programming a first software prototype which uses the samples of the keyboard itself, thus no additional software sampler as it offers for microtonal purposes, for example, Pianotech, has to be bought. But Sandro Balzarini's software works only for a couple of Yamaha keyboard types, however. Right from the beginning, without me having asked him about, his patch offered the option to choose the reference pitch and thus the register and the division of octave flexibly. It's particularly great that it's possible to change the register during the piece because the pitch range is very small. For example, with 88 keys of the keyboard and 16 tones, respectively 96 tones per octave, less than 1 octave. Subsequently, I searched for partners for modifying the patch for that it is possible to use it with any standard keyboard, as I am too stupid and too less a digital native for programming such a complex thing myself. When I met Martin Ritter and Alicia Aska from the group Organ and Graz for the first time at the premiere of my string quartet in March of last year at Kultum Graz, they were instantly interested about, and Martin programmed appropriate software for the symposium and harmonic interfaces and controllers for keyboard instruments last December by the group Organon at the Kunstuni Graz. Martin still implied some further options in this Max software for the microtonal keyboard. Every key of the keyboard can be tuned individually as well, what offers the possibility to play non-equidistant scales. And it's possible to split the keyboard in terms of microtonal scaling and register. And we think about achieving scales which don't transpose by the octave. For example, with a ninth as frame interval for having, for talking with Gérald Bizet, a spectre dilaté, or a seventh as a frame interval for having a spectre contracté, or a 12th as frame interval for using the Bolen-Pierce scale. But this is not there. It's I think it's not yet. You didn't yet program it.
The Bolen-Pierce not yet.
Yeah. But well, it's an idea, and I think sometimes it will happen. For the pianist, it obviously brings. Here is what I told. For the pianist, it obviously brings a special challenge with it, as the keys he or she is pushing don't coincide with the resulting pitches. And for the composer, it's absolutely necessary to write two parts in the score. One with the pushed keys and one with the resulting pitches. See here the first page of my Microtonale Etude 4, which was premiered in Graz at the aforementioned symposium. The piece consists in different overtone chords, in the end also distorted overtone chords, connected each by one hinge pitch in different grain sizes. It begins in the middle register in 12th tone, respectively 72 EDU, then in the middle register in 48 EDU, then in the high register in 72 EDU, and then with split chords in 19 EDU, and then in the very low register at the end in 32 tones, respectively 96 EDU. And now let's listen at least to a short part of the piece with the pianist Forrest Moody. So I stop here for still having a little bit room for questions, or maybe if you just have 1 or 2 minutes, for example, demonstrating how this works on a standard piano, but of course before questions.
Oh, okay, I just wanted to... Yes, please.
Oh, thank you very much for this beautiful overview. So, of course, most of the matters I've heard, or even Facebook, this Macchiano is very beautiful thing. But shortly, I want to say, comment just with my experiences. I have used synthesizer for Paul & Pierce digital keyboard, and it works really well. And of course, these pianists I have, they had no problem to adapt that. And I never wrote a double line for the sounding pitch, because you get the double length of the score. They have to turn too much, and I have done like this for an ensemble with strings, and for my violin concertos I made 2 different scores. One is the sounding pitch score, what maybe is for the conductor important, and one of the score where is the practical score where the instrumentalists read, and things like that work better, because I think the pianist, if they hit a wrong key, they have that in the touch and muscle memory.
That's absolutely right. It's not really, for the pianist, it's not necessary to see the sound. It's just nice for the composer and for you all.
And of course, as I stuck with just one system, like Paul & Pierce, and A440 was the anchor pitch, so I played so much of that. So I even could play the chords by memory or things like that. But if you play some cadential progression and things like that, but of course, if you every time change the US composer will not be able to learn every day different system. Other thing what I will see, of course, I have also figured out a program with Max MSP, and of course this is sometimes necessary, but and the last time I'm more lazy, because these software synthesizer like Pianotech, or even these free plugins like SearchSynth or Vital, so they are able to take in the Scala file, and it's very easy text. And of course, there's a lot of the most important tunings. You can find the Scala file and you map it, and so there's nowadays very easy to.
Is it also possible to change the tunings, register, and so on during one and the same piece with that?
It depends on the software. If you can define some switch, maybe that might a problem. I have sometimes in different pieces. I just put different tracks in Reaper, but inside the same piece. But I can imagine maybe a good compromise. Maybe if you program a max patch, what can read Scala files.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you have unique tables, and then it's a half a day that for a new tuning you have to repatch it.
Yeah.
I was thinking about that. I haven't yet realized that. But
actually, Shure Software Sampler is an alternative for that, as I explained. But well, the advantage of this Mac software programmed by Martin is that it's very flexible, and you can do all these sexy things with dividing the keyboard and so on, and it doesn't cost you anything additional to buy a software sampler and so on. So but The problem, on the other hand, it depends on the quality of the keyboard. If the keyboard sounds are shit, the piece doesn't sound good. If the keyboard samples are good, and you maybe pose a loudspeaker under a standard piano for also having the resonance of it, it can almost sound like a real piano.
I've put the loudspeaker in the piano photo just visually or from the sound projection to imitate the Roland PS piano.
I'm really sorry to interrupt. We're even over the time. I know there are some other questions. I would have a suggestion. Can you do the piano demonstration right after the concert? Maybe a few minutes. Can you take it to the concert? So right after. At 5 should start the concert. Today Mozarteum closes at 7. That's why I really need to push ourselves a little bit. I'm really sorry to do this. And thank you very much, Matthias.
Just one thing to lead to the next presentation. Now, I didn't talk about things like microtonal organs. We had experienced a lot with these things, microtonal keyboard organ and so on at this symposium. So I can now directly take you to you for this alternative way of, well, let's say preparing a keyboard or an organ. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Welcome, Organon. Organon consisting of Klaus Alain, Alisa Aska, Martin Ritter, and Pablo Mariña. I can say this much better than in Polish names. Was founded in 2021 by the primary mission of providing information, tools, and resources for composers of organ music. The group recognized a lack of general and easily usable information about the organ for composers, which limits the development of robust body of works for the instrument. The group therefore also seeks to further develop the organ's role in a broader contemporary music context. Originally, these educational resources consisted of texts, images, short video tutorials, and recordings. The group has also participated in research projects to develop expansions to the organ itself, including the Frescobaldi 2 and harmonic keyboard in Heisman. They also founded a specialized conference in Graz and harmonic interfaces and controllers for keyboard instruments, at which they presented their work as well as of others. Organon has presented their research at the University of Dramatic and Performing Arts in Graz and Harvard University as a group. And all of the members are very active and involved composers and all researchers. Please welcome Organon. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your warm welcome. I think we can. Yeah, we were already introduced, so we are formed around the idea of exploring organ as an instrument in various directions. One direction that we are focusing on today is the question of tuning, of expanding tuning systems that are playable on organs. Here you can see this is our website that shows it's full of videos how to, let's say, how to use an organ as a contemporary composer. So it's a resource meant as a resource, a tutorial for composers. Before I would like to go more into detail, I would like to share a few more general thoughts about the question what is actually an instrument. and how does an instrument relate to the act of composition. And for me, the most important thing is that the central instrument of every composer is his imagination. So it's not the keyboards or not the guitars or flutes, but it's actually the imagination of the composer. And it's the definition for me of a composer that you have the ability to create sounds and create structures, pitch structures in your mind. And then the second step is, of course, to find a way of realizing it. But still, the starting point for me has always to be the mind and the imagination of the composer. And of course, in order to enjoy your freedom of imagination, the most important thing you have to do is to study history in order to gain as much knowledge as possible, because only through knowledge you have freedom to make choices and to develop new things. And we can see that some composers in the history managed to redefine their instruments without actually changing anything in the instrument, just through the way of writing differently. So, on the one hand, of course, technology is of course extremely important, and we are also kind of focusing a little bit on technology, but this doesn't mean that technology is kind of, as soon as we have a great technology, we have solved all our problems. Just the opposite. That's often sometimes a trap. You have developed the technology and then you also want to use it, and this can sometimes limit you again. So when we think back, as I said, in the history of music, there has been several attempts to change and redevelop and redefine instruments, and we could say that an instrument, of course, usually is never the invention of one single person, but it is kind of the condensation of the knowledge of generations of composers, musicians, and instrument builders that finally led to the development of a specific instrument. And on the other hand, we can see in the history that many instruments that were designed from scratch have not survived. We could even say that kind of countless carcasses of stillborn instruments line the path of music history. And so it's always a tricky thing to come up with a new instrument. And also sometimes the problem was that instruments were not developed starting from a imagination and artistic vision of a composer, but they were more some technical experiments or some musicologists or theoreticians who tried to demonstrate a tuning system without actually an imagination of what kind of music these instruments should actually produce. So this is led, I think, to this problem that so many instruments that they were developed almost faster disappeared than they appeared. And so the other major reason for this, for me, was that many of these instruments that were developed, they required a completely new way of playing. So actually you had to really learn a new instrument. And this is of course also something that if there's almost no repertoire and there's only one instrument, it's very hard to bring this into real life, so to speak, because of this limitations. For me now, when I look back again in the history, the far best example for expanding instruments is the solution that was found already in the 16th century. And one example, a late example of this, can be shown. It's shown here in this picture here, and I guess everybody from Salzburg will know this illustration because it's from Maneductio ad Organum by Samba from 1700. So he prepared pictures of this kind a 19 keys per octave keyboard in his, as I said, meine Ductio ad orgam, around I think 1701 or 1702, so quite late actually. No? And in order to make it very simple, if people wanted to use quarter comma mean tone temperament and wanted to use pure thirds, they had to decide what we can easily see between A sharp and B, or G sharp and E flat, and so in order to have pure thirds. And what is so advantageous about this keyboard layout now is that you can, if you just play let's say the lowest and the second row of keys, you can just play it as any other keyboard instrument of the period. And if you want to employ also the third rank, it's very easy because it's just tightly, maybe you can, yeah, okay, it's not so clear because it's very bright. So you see that it's very easy to play this keyboard. So for someone who plays organ or harpsichord, it was very easy to play this keyboard. You just have to know when you should use the key that is in the third row or the second row of keys. But basically, if you understand a little bit of music theory of this period, it's very obvious and very simple. So I think this is what was for me one of the most successful ways of developing an instrument that has more than 12 keys per octave. As I said, you can play with your standard playing technique, and it's a very intuitive way of playing, because you know your finger, you can, I think for me this is always important when you play, that of course first there is your imagination, and then you play your imagination, and then if you have, like in your fingers as an organist, you know, when you move your finger you already hear something. So then automatically, if you have a keyboard like this, your imagination will match the sound that the keyboard actually produces. So almost all of these instruments have been lost in history, and so for us it's very hard to actually play music from this period of time, and the question was how can we find a way of making it possible on the one hand to perform these pieces of the 16th, 17th century repertoire that require these split keys, but of course also on the other hand, how can we use this principle and create possibly different keyboard tunings that are completely different, but that with this principle can be very easily performed. And how we did this will be explained by my colleagues.
So first I'm going to show a very short video demonstration of the Frescobaldi itself. It's about 30 seconds. This device and why we decided to make it the way that we did, and what are some potential precedents or things that are somewhat similar that also existed as digital instruments. Because one of the things that's really important, that unlike the 16th century and previous times, we have so many computer music and digital technology tools available to us that enable certain things with tuning and exploration to be a lot more possible. And so there are, of course, digital keyboards that use this idea of adding keys, similar to a split key system. And here are just some examples of that. And so you can see that there are many, many keys added. They go far above and beyond the paradigms of the 16th century. There are also this sort of idea of retuning existing keys, which is something that you can do when you have MIDI keyboards. One example of this is the Rolly Rise, which was developed also very recently. and you can decide where to put your finger on the key, and that will retune the particular pitch. Also, a lot of synthesizers and keyboards now have the ability to change between several preset tunings. I mean, they will be preset and predetermined, but you can change while you're performing. There's also the software that Matthias already spoke about, but I will play a very short excerpt so that you can hear some of the retuning on the fly. This is another example of retuning existing keys in a digital context. So something I think that's really important to distinguish what we're doing from a lot of the other electronic microtonal keyboards, and why we decided it was important for us to design something from scratch, so to speak, is that a lot of them are custom built. They're often bespoke for the performer, so a performer will decide what they would like to do and then create instruments so that they can achieve the ends. They also require a new performance paradigm. This is also common with electronic instruments, that an instrument is developed and the person that develops it is also the performer and they know how to perform it, but it's not necessarily an existing performance paradigm. Often they're very expensive. A Rolly Rise retails at $1,300, and you have to then purchase two separate devices. And so what we did, you actually can purchase this and attach it to an existing keyboard. And so while a lot of these ideas are extremely inventive, they're extremely interesting, we just wanted something, we were creating something for a completely different purpose. And so we developed the Frescobaldi between October and December 2022, and this is an example of sort of adding keys to an existing keyboard, in this case 5 extra keys per octave. And this was developed under support of a prototyping research grant at the Kunstuniversität Graz. And we presented this final prototype, so this is just a prototype at our symposium that we developed together and presented last December in Harmonic Interfaces and Controllers for Keyboard Instruments. And we've since presented it elsewhere and here. And we are now entering a further research phase to develop the second version out of the prototyping phase, beginning right now. The benefits of this particular instrument are that it can attach to any keyboard. As I've already said, you don't need to purchase a second keyboard. It's also extremely portable. We did carry it all the way across the world and back, and it's still functioning. And most importantly, because we designed this with this idea of 16th century performance practice, you can retain a performance paradigm that is already derived from historical music. And that's different from a lot of existing and pre-existing split key and harmonic microtonal keyboards for digital devices, because you don't need to learn a completely new performance paradigm, and it is not bespoke and specific for a certain keyboard. This type of device, as we were discussing, some of the reasons that we wanted to develop it is, on the one hand, to enable the performance of historical music in the proper tuning systems, but it can also have a lot of other impacts, including allowing more experimentation with microtones, because you can eventually be able to adjust the tuning. Also, it enables to play and perform in mean tone tuning, and also it can do things like aid rehearsal situations and also allow performers to really hear and listen and embody microtones, because this is a fixed system. So once it's tuned, it's set. I'll briefly discuss a little bit about the hardware design before passing it off to my colleagues. So of course, one of the most challenging aspects of designing this device is that, unlike normal keyboards, which you perform on, there is absolutely no protection, absolutely no housing, and it's placed on top of the keyboard. And so we had to solve a lot of issues in order to make this possible at all. And so for the key design, obviously the most important aspect is that it is somehow related to performance practice and how a performer would actually use keys. In this case, we needed to use something existing because we thought it would be the easiest for troubleshooting, and so we went with existing keys for computer keyboards and the insides of them, and we selected one that was as close to the weight of a keyboard key as possible, and then designed a 3D printed housing, and then basically glued it all together, and then soldered to the end of the key. So basically there's 2 solder points, and then we soldered from this key. And the reason we did it with such a sort of simple design, it's not as ergonomic as it should be, but it allowed us to troubleshoot very efficiently and to make sure that everything worked for the prototyping purposes. Next, we needed to find a way to mount the device, and this was perhaps the most challenging element because somehow we have to make it fixed enough that a performer can play and that the keys and things won't move around, and that it also won't force other keys down, which is again extremely challenging. And for this prototype, we have a fixed length piece of wood with 2 screws on the end that actually go inward and can extend outward to fit in a keyboard. In this case, it actually does fit, but we designed it for the Viscount specifically, so it is actually the length for the Viscount. And so then this mounts onto the keyboard, and the keys are actually glued onto this device, and they then are plugged into a Raspberry Pi, and from here I will pass it off to Martin, who will discuss how the software in the Raspberry Pi communicates with the device.
Wow. My job was to make all those different hardware components talk to each other. As what said, we had the Viscount electric organ. This was the Viscount Cantorum Duo, so a 2-register organ with
2 manual.
2 manual. This is the right terminology. 2 manual organ with many different stops, which we will get to in a minute. Of course, our extension, the Raspberry Pi, and all of those had to somehow communicate, know what each one was doing at any given time to produce the sound that we wanted. So the Viscount Cantorum, of course, an electric organ, it has it's MIDI based, so we can get MIDI information from it, which keys are pressed. Unfortunately, when we have stop changes, we cross over into SysX. For the Raspberry Pi, we have the GPIOs for communicating with the outside world, and of course we have to deal with audio at some level. So all of those systems had to talk to each other. MIDI, of course, we all know, it's very reliable, very mature, extremely easy to work with, and pretty much universal these days. Any electronic music device will run on MIDI on some level. SysX, even older than MIDI, extremely reliable, but extremely tedious to work with, to say the least. Least of it being that it is in hex notation, which, well, we can work with if we need to, but it's not easy. The biggest issue is that it is vendor specific. So each instrument, each vendor can decide how to implement it, how to communicate with it. And so for the Viscount, for example, to change the stop, to change the sound of the organ, we would get the information via SysX that is vendor specific in this case. So if we go to a different organ or a different keyboard, all that code will break because there's no more communication. So that is still one thing we need to address in a future iteration, how to deal with those vendor specific messages. Next, of course, we have the Raspberry Pi and having to deal with communicating with this. We used the Model 3 because at the time, as we found out when we started this, there was this worldwide Raspberry Pi shortage. We couldn't get our hands on the Model 4. Luckily, I had an old Model 3 B hanging around at home. All the software is Python, so everything on the Pi runs in Python. But for the, just some images of all the cabling we have. I don't know, you can see it here, the breadboard to connect from the Frescobaldi to the Pi. As I said, it is all in Python, but for the audio core, which is Cython, so the C lower level library access through Python, which we needed for the speed and just performance of the Raspberry Pi for what we needed it to do. Initially, what we were hoping when we started this is that we could do it all in MIDI, that we would plug in the Viscount into the Raspberry Pi via a MIDI interface, and that we could send back retuned information like we did with the ePiano, like we just heard. Unfortunately, the Viscount does not allow for that. The company closed that system. We emailed them, we begged them that we could get access to their MIDI core. They wouldn't budge, so we had to come up with a different way of doing it. We used a sample library. Pablo will talk about that in a minute. So in terms of what the Pi is actually doing right now is it holds all the samples. It allows us to load and unload the different stops of the organ that are available on the Viscount, and through the Cython modules we can play those samples back, mix them. We can retune them to depending on what system we are running. Sort of retune them. We have a couple of bugs that we are still working on, but I must say I was actually really impressed with the Raspberry Pi, because even if we running all the possible stops that the Viscount has at the same time, and we are retuning them in real time on the Pi, we're not even close to maxing out the Pi. So I've never seen it go over 20-30% of its capacity. So it's actually working really well in that regard. Yeah, I think that's it in terms of how all the systems work together. And Pablo will talk about
the samples. So yeah, the original plan was coding, but then because the SysX wouldn't permit return, I had to spend my time recording every manual, every stop in the Viscount. That is it's a medium model, no?
Yeah.
But anyways, it's around like 2,000 samples per overall. Then we had to also completely shift a little bit the planning of what the software will do in that regard, and and think about how to prepare all the material that was recorded. Fortunately enough, the Viscount is main source of playing the samples is completely dry, and the process of the reverb model that the Viscount has is independent of the samples. So it goes in the model we have the recorded samples. The retuning was made previously in case that the Raspberry Pi could not handle retuning in real time or any other issues. And fortunately enough, it runs exactly like Viscount would run the samples dry. It follows exactly a weird logic that the Viscount has with the mixing, where black keys go into a right channel and the white keys go into the left channel. It's actually mirroring this particular behavior. So what in this case for the demonstration here, this is using a mixed library with one uniting reverb, but well, in the Viscount the possibility is completely. It was completely mirroring the functionality. So when you activate in the Viscount, you press a beautiful stop with reeds, and it will activate it in the Viscount and in the Raspberry as well. And that brings us to, I mean, what a lot of my process with Martin was pretty much thinking how to do all these adaptations, right? And well, there is some of the samples. So you see, they're totally believable. They have a very nice sample library. So, I mean, now we got a new support for the Cook and Stadtratz to continue the development of the Frescobaldi itself. And the next immediate changes will be like have a mobile interface to interface and change the tuning of the keys independently. Now everything is set, we turn on, it stores, it only works with Fresco, with the Viscount. So in this way we'll be able to configure the Frescobaldi for other devices. Then we need to change the mounting to something more flexible, more durable, and yeah, this carbon box. And also change to actual keys, like with the action key from a keyboard, also with the possibility of velocity, if it wants to be used with other kind of sounds aside from organ sounds. Aside from that, of course, we have even more plans, because why not? Wireless, very custom sound banks, because there's also now it's using the samples of Viscount is probably not legal. It sounds very cool. Yeah. At least we'll have to have we will have to talk with them if we could do a version for them in that case. And well, another thing that is, I think it's probably one of the things that will come with the new immediate things is the capability of realigning the keys also. That will make it even more adaptive. And yeah, in the end, that's all. I think the most interesting part about this project, hardware, software, and ideologically wise, is that it's always meant to adapting to existing paradigms and to existing systems, to existing functions to existing functioning things that are already there. And I think that it's quite a future.
Yeah, just one sentence. I mean, this sampling is so important because now we have really a full organ that can be played in any tuning. You know, also the historic organs, they're usually just one stop or something like this. But now you can actually have like all the colors. It's a real organ. It's not just like even Vicentino's Archi Organo was never meant to be an organ, so to speak. It was always more in a supporting role. And now with this, we can actually have full organ sounds or any other sounds. And so that I think that's why the sampling is so important, because it really opens up an instrument, and it's not just something to practice or to hear. No? Sorry.
Well, thanks for
Yeah.
bringing it up. I don't know. I think.
Thank you.
Thank you for.
Yeah, I don't know who.
Who wants to? I choose you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for seeing your amazing presentation again. I was there also in December. I hope it doesn't troubleshoot that often as in December. I think you had some problems there.
Yeah, it was very nervous. No, but now it's still working.
Somehow.
Great to hear that. And I was wondering, so because originally I had the idea that you are just manipulating the pitch of the device, but can you can also like load some specific tuning for Viscount organ, which you then also adapt for the added keys, or is it only for the added keys only?
It's the Raspberry Pi is only running the added keys, and the keyword in this case Viscount runs its own samples. In the case of the Viscount, the samples and the Viscount samples and the samples on the Raspberry Pi are exactly the same, and they are retuned. There is, I mean, that's why probably there is no way of distinguishing the difference in between them.
But, well, my question was more like, can you load some different scales or tuning into Viscount and to this?
Yeah, the Viscount is possible to change the tuning system, and the Raspberry Pi will.
But only
will
preset
change the
tuning systems on the Viscount.
The Viscount has a number of traditional historical tunings you can switch between. Now, right now, the way it works right now, the Fresco is only playing the added keys from the Raspberry Pi. Now, in theory, it would be entirely possible to load the entire sample bank onto the Raspberry Pi and totally bypass the Viscount output. So you could, in theory, retune it to anything you like. So the software, it kind of already allows for that, because I designed it that way already with that in mind. It's just it hasn't been really tested yet because we had other issues to deal with first. But that is a possibility.
It's really dependent on the processor and the RAM allocation.
So basically, then in the other step, the Viscount would just function just as a plain MIDI keyboard.
Exactly. Yes.
That's great. I think
That would be the most fantastic thing. But
yeah,
really, I don't know.
That might be too much for the Raspberry. We will find out at some point in the future. But that has been in the back of my mind as I designed the code, so it is buried in there.
Maybe one small other question. I don't remember if I asked you this in December, but have you considered some other processing unit, something like Bella or something which is different than Raspberry Pi?
I had one, so we used it. No, we haven't. But who knows what the future brings?
Because I've worked a bit with Bella, and it has great outputs because it has its own sound processing unit, and you just load. It supports C++ and pure data, super collider and stuff like this. So maybe this could work if Raspberry Pi isn't working in the upgraded version. I mean.
Good to know. Good to know.
I know there's other microcomputers, controllers out there that are worth looking into. The biggest issue we're running into is just inputs and outputs. The GPIOs. There's only 40. And most of them are not usable for what we need them for, so we are already running out of space to add more keys. So there's something else we need to figure out how to deal with that.
Thank you.
Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. Of course, this is. You was not yesterday and not in my presentation. I talked about 22 equal. Temperament, what we used in practice, and I developed a DIY solution. I took two Korg MicroKey 61 keyboards stacked on each other because the keys are smaller than you can reach it. This is not for real playing, but for finding pitches. It's and coaching musicians. It's good, and you have both have velocity. So, but of course, to have a solution like this, that would be fantastic. But of course, how even if you have no restriction in the GPIO, can you have more than like 19 EDO or if you?
Well, software-wise, you can do whatever. But
because how much space you have on the keyboard to split the. Or for 31, you need then split the.
You have the keys physically there.
Yeah, physically, how much you can add?
Yeah.
We're adding just 5 keys per octave. I mean, we are, as mentioned, we're using this historical model of keyword as a reference. You don't want to make a computer keyword, for example. It's not the purpose.
For me, I mean, this is a limitation if you just have 90, but it's a compromise because this guarantees that you can actually play. You don't have to change to a new instrument. So this was a clear limitation that we said. Of course, we know we have keyboards, but this is exactly the point that we want to limit us to this, because this allows us to keep the playing technique the same.
However, what you tune those keys to
Can be anything
will
you
be very flexible. So one added key could be tuned to 16 EDO. The next one plays the 24 EDO or whatever it may be.
Yeah, because I need then at least 2 additional keys over the black keys for the achieve 22. And
if you want pure, if you want to have access to all notes at all times.
That was my approach as a composer for the system. But okay, other question is how you realize technically samples. Are they very long, or have you find a method how to loop them without listening that it's looping?
We did a method to looping. It was a pain. It was horrible. We spent a lot of time like designing the way in Cython of how to loop it, depending on emulate the same attack and release and keep it consistent in terms of.
But the sample itself is only 8 seconds long, I think.
Okay.
And it is looped and
it keeps there as long as it needs.
Sometimes if you have a sound in your DAW and you double and crossfade it, it's sometimes a nightmare to do it so that you don't listen it.
No. I mean, we took a lot of time in sort of designing this, and still we'll still keep working.
You have to catch the zero crossings or something like that.
We actually went where we went with is not zero crossing, just it's just intersampling, logarithmic sampling ramps.
Yeah.
So I don't know how.
So design a suitable crossfade.
It's not. It's interpolating in between samples.
Yeah.
So it goes. These are very fast transitions, and it's just trying to. If a sample in between is here and here, in terms of the square, we will try to feel the data. Yeah. And there is I think a lot of sampling-based processes work in this way. So the flexibility of working with C is that you can work at sample level.
Yeah.
So you don't need to do crossfades.
Yeah.
And this kind of thing. Because that is very rough.
Yeah.
It's extremely rough. It's very. I mean, if you want to do a crossfade in a recording and make it very soft and very attenuated, you actually need to go into the sample level and make the addition there. So we still need to work in this regard with Cython, but that is the goal, to use these sample ramps for interpolating the data.
Yeah. Okay.
Matthias? I don't remember from December. For the samples, did you sample the electronic organ? Okay.
Yeah. Everything is coming from the
Viscount.
And I'm not sure if you already answered that question, but are you thinking about sampling an analog organ, and so one day using this Visconti organ? I don't remember the name.
Viscount.
Together with your added keys only as a triggering keyboard, let's say, of those samples.
I mean, what do you mean by analog? Like that
analog organ, like a church or studio organ, something.
But I mean
like
that is what actually Viscount of. That is one of the features of Viscount. That is an analog organ recording. But I mean, if, being realistic by ourselves, recording that quality of sampling recording, it's. I mean, we don't have the means. The problem with the church is like, the reverb on the space, and to use those recordings in a flexible manner.
I mean, if I may say, I think like these companies, they have experience of 40 years of doing this,
and a lot of money,
I think the quality of these sounds is really high. I mean, this was for me appealing. I mean, I'm classical organist, so I had always this distance to these digital instruments, but now I have 2 of them, and you know, if you put them in a reverberant space, it's very hard to tell that this is not a real organ with the appropriate speakers. So to kind of try for ourselves to do this whole thing again, I think wouldn't be worth it. I mean, that's really extremely high quality what they already offer. So I think it's much makes more sense to steal them.
Yeah, I mean, what somebody could do is take like existing samples from like an organ, because sometimes you can buy really expensive sample packs. If somebody owned one of our devices in the way future, and they could use it in a church with that existing sample pack that's probably really, really high quality. But that would be an
I also remember that the sounds from December, and they were really good. There was just one thing. What was a little hardship to me, that they had this integrated automatic reverb.
Yeah, that was
but that's
our
adjustable,
choice.
I think.
I mean, you can just turn off the reverb.
Yeah.
It's possible.
Yeah, and
Yes,
you can adjust it, and then if you put it in a large church with loudspeakers and turn off the reverb, then you just have the natural reverb of the space.
But we were in kind of a drier space.
That's what I meant. That the recordings are recorded dry. There is no.
Okay.
I mean, Pablo, maybe you can just play a little bit of the.
Now sound from
the
computer.
So there is a recording on the.
Oh yeah, yes, we also have a. I mean, I can also, if there's time, I could play a short recording where you can hear it. I don't know how much time.
The problem, the concert is starting. I'm really sorry.
Okay.
The guy who keeps the atmosphere.
It's on our website.
On the website,
Yes, it's on
from
our
the beginning,
website.
there's some recordings from.
Okay, yeah. He said, thank you very much.